Happy, beautiful day. It's Pete Cohen here. Welcome to the Pete Cohen podcast. We are well into this series of podcasts, which is all about geniuses. It doesn't matter which episode you're listening to. Maybe this is your first one in this series, but I'd really encourage you to step back and look at life with a fresh pair of eyes. We know that people don't change when we tell them what to do. Real change comes when people's perspective comes. And my role, my outcome with all of these podcasts is for you to be empowered with new tools and tips and strategies and new perspectives, and none more so when we're looking at the geniuses that have lived. I believe there's a genius in every single one of us. I will explain more. But who is today's genius? Well, this might come as some surprise, but it's Elizabeth the First, 1533 to 1603. Join me after the theme tune to find out why Elizabeth I was a genius. The big question is, how are some people in the world today creating the results they want with their health, wealth, and happiness? What exactly are these people doing? This podcast will give you the answers and inspire you to live the life that you want today. Happy, beautiful day. It's my privilege to be here. Thank you so much for all of your incredible feedback regarding the Pete Cohen podcast, the Inspiration Revolution. Today's podcast is brought to you by Pete Cohen Coaching. If you want to see the difference that coaching can have in your life, the positive impact, then go to petecohen.com/coaching. There's an incredible video resource on there, 3 steps for creating the life that you want and for you to become the leader that you want to follow. I would really encourage you to go and check that out. Let me share with you some of the most powerful perspectives I've ever come up with, so that maybe you feel more empowered about who you are and where you are going. If you then want to get on a call with me, we can have a conversation about where you are right now, where you're going, and the best way for you to get there. What do you need to do? Look, one thing that we all know, we all have in common, is we have a desire to grow. And this is something I talk about a lot. And if we don't grow, I really think we do the opposite of growing. There's a part of us that is dying all the time. You know, genetically, most of us could live a very, very long life. In fact, genetically, it's possible for human beings to live to about 120 years old. But the reality is we don't do that. And I think maybe one of the reasons we don't live as long as we could do is there's a part of us that is dying that really needs to live. There's a word, you might have heard of it. It's called ikigai. It's a Japanese word, which really kind of means, what are you here to do? And if you ever meet someone from Japan, ask them, what's your ikigai? And you'll realize that a lot of people live a long life in Japan is because every day they have a reason for getting up every single day that drives them. And it doesn't have to be to change the world like Elizabeth I and many of the other people that we featured in this set of podcasts. It just can be they have a purpose that drives them to get up every single day. Because if you don't, just think of it like this. Your life is like a garden. You represent a garden. And if you want your garden to grow and look great, you've got to go out there and go to work on it. If you don't, it will just grow anyway. And often it will grow in a way where the weeds take over, it gets out of control, and it doesn't look very good. If you want to have a great life, it happens not by chance, it happens by design. And all you got to do around the world right now is realize more than ever, we need geniuses to rise up. People like you and me to say, you know what, I'm not standing for this. I want more. I want to be more. I want to leave a legacy and leave a mark. And with all of the geniuses that we've featured so far, there's been some real qualities. There's been some real similarities with all of them. One of them I picked because he's a genius to me, and that's Michael Jordan. As I look up to my wall and I see a picture of Michael Jordan about 3 feet away from me with his hand, holding his hand out to me. And every day I look at that and think, Michael Jordan is giving me a hand up because I've fallen down. You know, and every time we fall down, it's not a question of falling down. It's what we do when we get up. That's what defines human beings. All of the other geniuses we featured, I believe, really are people that have left an incredible mark on the world. They are timeless. And actually, I believe Michael Jordan is timeless. I think he has inspired so many people. And before we get stuck into Elizabeth I, not literally stuck into her, I really wanted to point out something. There's a couple of things I really just want to point out here with all of you. And it's this. What if you're alive for as long as people remember you? Human beings seem to want to leave a mark. We want to be remembered in some way, shape, or form. And I believe that another purpose of our life is that to live on even after we've gone. Now, my father passed away a year and a half ago, and every single time I give a presentation all over the world or do a podcast, in many cases I'll mention the fact that my dad always said, "Son, it's not what you know, it's who you know." And I know a lot of people because he told me that from a very early age. But every time I tell that story, I'm keeping his memory alive. And many people will quote my dad and many other things that my dad said. I won't repeat all of them. But he is still alive. And this is what I believe part of being a genius is these people are still alive. And Elizabeth I is someone who really changed the course of the world in so many ways. And I really wish that I'd been taught at school in a different way that rather than just being told about history, we were told about or taught about history in an inspirational way. The inspirational way meaning keeping someone alive, taking something from Elizabeth I and applying it to your life. If I was in charge of education all over the world, I would definitely teach about geniuses, but to the point of view, like I say, that we could then apply something from that person's life, that we could enrich our own and then others. And Elizabeth I is an incredible example of that. And I did not appreciate her in school at all. But now, and what I'm about to share with you is really important, really, really important, especially when you see the leaders all around the world. The country that I'm from, Great Britain, is in turmoil right now. It is probably the biggest turmoil this country has had in in a very, 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 very long time. It's a complete shambles and has been for a few years now, and there has never been a more important time than for all of us to take the lead, rather than relying on other people to dictate everything that we do in our life. Elizabeth I is a great example of really possibility and standing up for what you believe in, and so much more. She lived from 1533 and she died in 1603. Her reign was for 45 years. 45 years. That is incredible. I don't know what the average reign of the kings and queens that have ever lived, but it has to be right up there. And there's lots of things that I really encourage all of you listening just to think, well, what could I learn from Elizabeth I? Who is she and why should I care? Well, I think she was an extraordinary figure. And just a little overview, through her reign, there was something that became known as the Golden Age of Prosperity. She sponsored people like Shakespeare. She was really responsible for bringing music and poetry, encouraging people to create, encouraging people to listen. And she really stood up for what she believed in. She defeated the Spanish. She defeated the French, Francois, I think, the First. She defeated multiple death squads who came from the Vatican over to kill her because she was a Protestant, and she was encouraging. Well, actually, I would say she's encouraging people to be Protestant. She was also someone who actually believed that people had the right to believe whatever they wanted in their own soul. And the Catholic Church really, really didn't like that. In fact, if Philip of Spain with the Armada who came over to beat the English had actually won, then we probably would all be speaking Spanish, or if Francois I of Spain had defeated, we'd all be speaking French. She really stood up for what she believed in. And what's interesting about her, if we just look back, maybe some of you have heard of her father. Her father was Henry VIII. Now, what do we know about Henry VIII? Well, he killed a few people and was a pretty ruthless leader. In fact, Elizabeth's mum, Anne Boleyn, was beheaded for adultery when Elizabeth I was only 2 years old. Now, you can imagine the impact that could have on a child. This is one of the things I really love about Elizabeth I, is how what happens to people in their life could be the making of them or be the breaking of them. And who knows, Elizabeth I's mum being executed maybe was part of the making of Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I's kind of stepmom, if you like, was Catherine Parr, who was Henry VIII's last wife, who really looked after Elizabeth. And this is another thing I love about Elizabeth I, is she recognized that things needed to be passed on, that we all need coaches, we all need mentors who will look after us and guide us. Catherine Parr maybe had some incredible foresight and realized that Elizabeth would be tested in the future. It was unlikely that Elizabeth was ever going to be the queen, because there were two more people that were heir to the throne before her, her half-sister Mary and her half-brother Edward. But anyway, we'll come to that in a moment. It's almost like a soap opera, all of this, but it's absolutely true. Catherine Parr made sure that Elizabeth could speak multiple languages. Elizabeth could speak French. She could speak Spanish. She could speak Latin. And her brother, Edward, who died after being in the throne for not long, his half-sister, like I say, it sounds like an episode of EastEnders here. His sister Mary became queen. Now, Mary was a Catholic and actually locked Elizabeth away in the Tower of London. I mean, it's just crazy. And then Mary died, and then who became queen? Well, it was Elizabeth I. She was a Protestant, and she set about one of the greatest reigns in the history of probably the world. Now, think about this. A female leader in a very male world, which is something which still exists today, but perhaps it's not as severe as it once was. And I believe that's one of the things that Elizabeth did. I believe she was an incredible leader because she embraced different types of leadership. She was what I would call, she integrated the male qualities of leadership, of being bold and being assertive, with the female qualities of leadership, which was of compassion, being receptive and listening. She realized that she needed to have great people around her. So in her court, she made sure that she had the ambassador of Spain, the ambassador of France. She had someone from the holy city of the Vatican there. And she would talk to these people. She would learn from these people. She understood that she had to have the most intelligent people around her. Even though sometimes they might disagree with her, she knew that she couldn't do what she wanted to do without these people. There's a lot of some controversy around exactly her relationship with other people, but the story goes that she forgo a family for the welfare of her country. She really believed in something. She believed in the greatness of humanity. She believed in the greatness of poetry, of art. She sponsored Shakespeare, and she was an incredible example to female leaders. You know, what followed on, and I want to just think about today how many people were inspired by Elizabeth I. Apparently Jane Austen was massively inspired by Elizabeth I. Mary Wollstonecraft, and even Germaine Greer, one of the most well-known people in the feminism movement. She got a PhD in Elizabethan studies. And this is the thing. You think about what I said right in the beginning of the podcast around people's legacy lives on as long as we remember them. So what else did she really change? Well, apart from changing the concept of women empowerment, and that movement is still moving to this day, and it was probably her that really kind of got that thing moving, and there's never been a more important time for that debate to continue and for women to have equal rights in this is something I'm so passionate about. Just as an aside here, working with a professional women's football team and watching them play yesterday against Arsenal, it was incredible. I would actually prefer to watch the women than watch the men. Now, some people might say, well, the women aren't as fit or as strong. I think it's absolute nonsense. You know, and the gap in the payment that the men earn to the women is absolutely ridiculous. Now, I'm sure that gap will close, but we all have to speak up for the equal rights of human beings. Now, just with football, there's more money in the male game than there is in the female game, but we should all stand up for what we believe in, and that's what I personally I'm so grateful for people like Elizabeth I, who are shining examples of what is possible. Now, when we talk about the golden age, the amount of wealth and prestige that happened, and because she encouraged people like Francis Drake, who circumnavigated around the world, or Walter Riley, who sailed to America and discovered the state of Virginia. In fact, Virginia is called Virginia after Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen. Like I say, you can pretty much tell I'm very passionate about inspirational people. You know, the book I wrote, Inspirators, recently, my last book, my 19th book, is called Inspirators because it's all about people who breathe life into who they are and where they are going. So where are you going in your life? You know, it's not like you have to become the next queen or king of England, because that's not going to happen. Well, you know, it's probably stranger things have happened, but it's unlikely. What is it in your life that you still want to do? I mean, if you just take a moment to think about it, what have you got left in your basement? In the Rocky Balboa film, when, you know, Rocky's in his 60s, I think, and he says, I've still got something in the basement. What basement? You know, whether you're young or old, what do you have a burning desire to do? What impact, what mark do you want to leave on this earth? Look, let's just start to kind of bring this to an end. What was amazing about Elizabeth I is she didn't let her past define her. You know, of everything she went through, she could have had some serious, what's the word I'm looking for? Grudges against her upbringing, her family. She could have become more like her father and learned to be incredibly destructive. I mean, she did have her half-sister beheaded, but that's another story. Nobody's perfect. She really did change the concept and the power or the empowerment of women. She really stood up for tolerance. Believe it or not, she created some form of unification around Catholics and Protestants in the UK. In the UK, it wasn't the United Kingdom at that time. I don't know, when did the United Kingdom become the United Kingdom? I'm sure a historian will contact me and tell me. She wanted to bring people together, and she took actually the image of the crucifix, which was a real Catholic symbol, and integrated that into Protestantism. She expanded the world. She was someone who stood up for so many things. She had this real desire to learn. Again, another great example. She never stopped learning, never stopped her curiosity to see what else she could learn. She stood up for what she believed in, and she saw talent. She saw talent in William Shakespeare, sponsored William Shakespeare. And if you think about the impact that William Shakespeare had on this earth, well, stay tuned, because we will be doing a podcast on William Shakespeare, because he is also a genius. And I believe there's a genius in you. So what could you learn from Elizabeth I? If Elizabeth I was alive today, what sort of a conversation do you think she'd have with you? What do you think she'd say to you? Pete, That's a bit of a deep question. Well, we've all got an imagination. For me, if she was standing here right now, I know she'd say, stand up for what you believe in. Squeeze as much juice as you possibly can out of this thing called life. Be everything that you can be and more. She faced the battle that we all face, the battle of what is going on in between our ears. Everyone faces this battle. Why? Well, we grew up into a world where you had to fit in. You had to survive. Survival was what it was all about. So you could get to the age where you could reproduce. That is programmed into our DNA. That's just, and unfortunately, through going through that process, many of us have experienced events and circumstances and been in situations that has made us become who we are, where we talk to ourselves in often a very judgmental way. To rise up and overcome your past is to recognize the genius in you. That's what the Romans believed. Everyone had a genius inside them. They got that idea from the Greeks. They called it a daimon, the inner spirit, the guide within you that is getting you to listen to this podcast from beginning to end. Maybe you feel yourself being distracted. That is the duck in your head. And one of the things I'll be talking about more as we go forwards and we continue to inspire people all over the world to look at life with a fresh pair of eyes, it's that awareness that you are not that voice in your head. That is something that is going on. You are your awareness. You are the awareness of what you're saying to yourself. Once you become aware, it can be quite scary for some people because they realize, whoa, there's a lot of stuff going on in there. It's when you start to win the war against yourself and maybe find some peace and maybe find some time to look at life in a way where you feel empowered and even excited or enthused by where you're going. I am really grateful for Elizabeth I, 1533 to 1603, who reigned this country for 45 years. This country right now that is in absolute turmoil, but maybe some good will come out of it. And everything that she stood for, she didn't let her past define her. She let her past fuel her desire to leave an impact in this world. Elizabeth I, thank you so much for everything you did. You changed the concept of women and the empowerment of women. You tolerated and you believed people should be able to believe whatever it is they wanted to believe. You were an inspirational leader. You expanded people to follow and do the things that they wanted to do, from finding prosperity to music to arts. You knew the power of having great people around you, the Mastermind Alliance, and you stood up for what you believed in. You are a genius, Elizabeth I, and your spirit lives on in me, and maybe now it lives on in loads of other people. Go and tell people about Elizabeth I. Come and join our Facebook community. It's a private Facebook community. Just go onto Facebook and find or search for Pete Cohen Podcast, and you'll find it. You can join and or load of the podcast there. This is, I think, maybe the 210th episode. And I really appreciate you guys being here. We know a great life doesn't happen by chance. It happens by design. You can design it. I believe in you. Take care. And we'll see you next time for another Pete Cohen Podcast. Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you want to find out what life coaching can do for you with me, Pete Cohen, then simply visit petecohen.com/coaching and book a free strategy call, and we can help you find out exactly what it is that you want and help you put a plan in place to create the future that you want today.